And with us now to weigh in on this issue and more is Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, welcome back to the program. Thank you for being with us.
Karina, thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
We've had so many mass shootings in the state of Texas in the last 5 years, and there's growing support even among Republicans for passing some common sense gun reform laws like universal background checks, raising the age from 18 to 21 to be able to buy AR-15 style rifles. Why not support some of those?
Well, Karina, you're right. We have had too damn many shootings in Texas, and it is horrific. We are seeing violent crime. We're seeing mass murders rising across the state. The problem is the solutions that you're talking about, which is always where the Democrats go, they don't do anything meaningful to prevent violent crime. If you want to stop violent crime, and I've spent 20 years fighting against murderers, against mass murderers, against those committing violent crime, what works is targeting the bad guys. What works is targeting the criminals. I've introduced repeatedly legislation in the Senate to lock up felons and fugitives and those with serious mental illness who try to illegally buy guns. I've introduced legislation to double the number of police officers on our schools to keep our children safe. I've introduced legislation to invest $15 billion in new mental health counselors in schools, so that when you find a troubled young man who so often, someone who commits a crime like this starts off with significant mental health issues, you can intervene and help that young person at the outset and prevent these crimes. And I will tell you, frustratingly, Karina, every time I've battled on the Senate floor to pass this legislation, the Democrats block funding for more police officers. They block efforts to prosecute violent felons and fugitives because their only priority is disarming law-abiding citizens, which doesn't prevent this sort of crimes, but it does make Texans more vulnerable. I believe you have a right to protect your family, and disarming you is not going to make anyone safer. What will make people safer is putting the bad guys in jail before they commit this kind of crime.
Well, Senator, and I know that you said that these are Democratic-led proposals, but we've even seen, particularly on the state level, and there's growing bipartisan support for the so-called raise the age bill. I mean, would you support something like that even on a state level?
So, look, I recognize that the press likes to push that, and that proposal doesn't make people any safer. And why is it that you think that a 19-year-old single mom living in the city doesn't have a right to protect herself and her kids? The Second Amendment protects our right, a fundamental right to keep our families safe. And the proposals you're suggesting, let's just make it harder for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. We know what happens. If you look at the jurisdictions with the strictest gun control laws, they almost invariably have among the highest crime rates and among the highest murder rates, because the law-abiding citizens comply and the murderers and the criminals do not. And so disarming law-abiding citizens is singularly ineffective. And just once, I wish the press would ask Democrats why they have repeatedly blocked my legislation to double the number of police officers in schools. Look, all of us want to keep our kids safe, and yet Democrats fight against having police officers present on campus to stop bad guys from trying to harm our kids.
Well, and I know we're seeing some different attempts at pushing some of those issues on the state level, and I am not pushing these proposals. I will just say that. I'm just trying to ask you about them. But I would like to turn to the border with the time that we have with you. I mean, you've been very critical of Biden's border policies, but since the end of Title 42, migrant encounters have dropped by half, according to a top official with the Biden administration. So, I mean, smoother than everyone anticipated?
Listen, that is the Biden administration's talking points, but let's just talk about facts. We have right now the worst illegal immigration our nation has ever seen. More than 6.5 million people have crossed illegally since Joe Biden became president. I was down on the border just a few days ago. Thursday night, I was down in Brownsville. It is absolute chaos. When I was there were more than 22,000 people camped in Matamoros, just on the other side of the Rio Grande River, waiting to cross over. There are over 170,000 people camped the whole length of the border, waiting to cross over. And I got to tell you, there's a reason that no Democrats were down there Thursday night as Title 42 was expiring, because you cannot see what's happening there and defend what's happening. Last year, 853 migrants died crossing illegally. When I brought 19 senators down to the Rio Grande River, we saw a dead body floating in the river of a man who had drowned trying to cross along. I've sat there with Texas farmers and ranchers. I've seen photograph after photograph of dead bodies the cartels have abandoned to die. I've seen women who've been viciously sexually assaulted by the human traffickers. I've seen little children, little boys and little girls violently brutalized by the cartels. This is not humane, what is happening. It is chaos, it is cruel, and the suffering is at a scope we've never seen before.
Well, Senator, I mean, with what you're saying, the House GOP border bill not likely to go anywhere in the Democratic-led Senate. I mean, what kind of border reforms do you think could realistically pass in this Congress?
Well, listen, Joe Biden could solve this problem tomorrow. One of the things to remember, Joe Biden inherited an incredible success at the border. Under President Trump, we saw the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. His first day in office, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they immediately halted construction of the border wall. They reinstated the disastrous policy of catch and release, and they ended the incredibly successful Remain in Mexico International Agreement. That caused this explosion of illegal immigration. Let me tell you just how dangerous it is. In 2018, the Mexican drug cartels made roughly $500 million in profits from human trafficking. Last year, they made over $13 billion. Joe Biden becoming president was, without exaggeration, the best thing that has ever happened to the Mexican drug cartels. They've made a 2,600% increase in their profits. And last year, Karina, we had over 100,000 Americans die of drug overdoses, two-thirds of which was Chinese fentanyl flooding across our southern border. That is a tragedy, and it's a direct political decision from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and sadly, every congressional Democrat repeatedly votes in favor of Biden's open border policies. This is horrific, and the state of Texas is paying the price for this.
Senator, I want to turn to the debt ceiling and the negotiations underway. I mean, first of all, what role do you play in those, and what kind of a deal will you support?
Well, listen, my view is what we've seen in Washington, particularly over the last few years, has been wildly reckless. We are bankrupting this country. Let's step back and provide a little context. In the year 2000, the national debt was $5 trillion. $5 trillion is a lot of money. Then George W. Bush came into office. Over 8 years, the national debt doubled from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. In 2008, Barack Obama came into office. Over the next 8 years, the national debt doubled again from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. So to put it in perspective, it took 42 presidents over 200 years to build up $5 trillion in debt, and it took 2 presidents, one Republican and one Democrat, just 16 years to quadruple that amount. Today, we're at $32 trillion, and it is an enormous threat. It is driving the inflation that is hurting Texans.
Sure.
And so my view on the debt ceiling is that we should use it as leverage to force real and meaningful restraints on spending. I think the House passed a very reasonable bill, and right now President Biden, I think, is being wildly irresponsible by saying he refuses to negotiate and the only outcome is keep spending money we don't have and keep borrowing from the Chinese.
Senator, lastly, I know you can't talk about your re-election campaign right now, but Donald Trump is running for re-election, several others challenging or thinking about challenging him. Who will you back?
Well, listen, I'm going to trust the voters. I will enthusiastically support the Republican nominee. And I got to say, Texans across our state, they recognize we're on the wrong path. What we're doing in Washington, this White House, is extreme. We've got galloping inflation that's hurting Texans across the state as the cost of everything's gone up, from food to electricity to gasoline. We've got out-of-control crime rates as the Democrats fight to abolish the police and put soft-on-crime DAs in office. And we have the worst illegal immigration in our nation's history at our southern border. You know, you started by asking me about mass shootings. It's worth noting that the mass shooter in Cleveland, Texas, was an illegal immigrant who had repeatedly entered illegally. And if the legislation I've introduced, Kate's Law, which locks up aggravated felons who enter the country illegally repeatedly, if legislation like that had been in effect, that shooting could have been prevented. But I think People across Texas, they're unhappy with the direction Washington's going, and they want to see low taxes, low regulations. They want to see lots of jobs. They want to see their families secure, supporting law enforcement and securing the borders. And Texans want our constitutional rights protected. I think that's a choice Texans are going to continue to make.
Senator Cruz, next time we'll get you outside of the Capitol to talk about your reelection campaign. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. And for more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button right over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app to get live news coverage, weather alerts, and more wherever you are. And don't forget to tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV for live local reporting every single day. We'll see you then.